Hello everyone, welcome back to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. It's a privilege to have a guest with us today who is the Reverend Dr. Matthew Roberts. Matthew, first of all, would you like to say hello to our listeners and our viewers?
I would very much. Hello to all of you who are watching and listening.
Now, it's an absolute joy to talk to you today, Matthew. And let me just point out that our supporters, Coalition for Marriage supporters, come from all faiths and none. If I'm honest, the people I encounter mostly are Christians and various different Christian denominations. However, I do encounter many people from other faiths. I do encounter many atheists and email them almost on a daily basis. But the thing that ties us together is this support of one man, one woman marriage. And as I often say, we are the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation. We support or represent individuals, tens of thousands of individuals and groups from all faiths and none, from all political persuasions and none. But the thing that ties us together is this concept that one woman, one man marriage brings something special and unique to society. That's not to say that other things don't exist in a liberal democracy. Clearly, just look around us, they absolutely do. But we think marriage between a man and a woman is special, it's unique. What all the secular evidence says is that it brings something very special and beneficial to society that we ought not forget and actually ought promote. And you'll know, Matthew, maybe that we've had several interviews with people who have come on the channel decrying what's happening in lots of churches and how lots of churches, in fact, have put aside this notion of one man, one woman marriage and have accepted all different forms of marriage and same-sex unions, etc., etc. Well, you've done exactly the opposite. And I'd like to talk to you today about something called the Greater Love Declaration, which was launched a couple of weeks ago, I think, at the time of filming. Could you tell us a little bit about what is the Greater Love Declaration?
Yeah, it's something very simple, really. It's a statement of standard historic Christian understanding of marriage, sex, and identity. And so, in one sense, it's something that ought to be very, very uncontroversial. We've not said anything which hasn't been said loudly and clearly by Christians all through the 2,000 years of Christian history. So that's what it is. And it describes what it is that Christians believe. But then it goes further than that. It's not just about what it is, but it's about why it is good. Because in the last few years, not really very many, only really in the last perhaps 10, 15, there's been a sort of social shift in Britain, so that lots of people seem now to assume that the teaching of marriage is an evil thing, that it's a bad and damaging thing for people. I think for many years before that, people have assumed that it was a quirky thing or an unnecessary thing. But there's been this shift to think that there's something inherently bad about it and damaging about teaching it. And so we've felt that we wanted to take the opportunity to present clearly why this is good. And then the third thing it's not just that this is what Christians believe and that it's good, but thirdly, it's a statement that we're not going to change from it. It's a statement by Christian ministers and stating very clearly that there is no room for change in this viewpoint because it's so fundamentally built into the whole Christian view of what it means to be human and indeed what it means to love. So that's what the Greater Love Declaration is. Anyone can read it, greaterlove.org.uk. We'd love all of your viewers to go and read it. And if they like it, to sign it.
So you're a minister of Trinity Church in York. That's an International Presbyterian Church.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think you were, weren't you a what do you call it? It's not the synod, is it? The international.
Yeah, we do have a synod. Yeah, we have.
Oh, you call it the synod. So you were the moderator of the English chapter, the English part or the British part of that synod for a few years.
Yeah, if you want to get into Presbyterian church government, we have presbyteries which are more local, right. And then the synod is the overall thing. And I have at different times served as moderator of the British Presbytery, right. And then at another time I served as a moderator of the synod, which is the over the whole denomination.
Okay, and just tell us, for those who don't know, those of us from an independent church background maybe, so what's the difference between a Presbyterian church and other churches?
Hopefully nothing that profoundly matters, in the sense that we're all if you're a church at all, you're a church of Jesus Christ, and we're aiming to be faithful servants of Christ. And but what's distinctive? I mean, Presbyterian Christianity is sort of I kind of describe it as being like it's like a car where you don't have any fluffy dice hanging from the ceiling, but you do have your foot to the floor on the accelerator. So Presbyterians are interested in having no bells and whistles. We don't add in lots of extras, but we do want to be as rigorously and as enthusiastically faithful to Christ as possible. And the ways that people notice for that are that we tend to, our churches are connected. We believe very strongly in the family of the church being a single family. So the word Presbyterian means we're ruled by elders, which lots of churches are, but our elders all meet together from all the different churches 4 times a year in a presbytery, and we're accountable to one another. And we have a very strong sense of accountability.
Now, this declaration, Matthew, isn't just for members of the Presbyterian Church. It's for anybody, isn't it? Anybody
Absolutely.
of the Christian faith.
And I'm the only Presbyterian on the writing group. It's very deliberately a group of Christian leaders from pretty much every denomination. I've checked our signatory list, and I've now spotted, I think, every denomination that I'm aware of. We've got people who've signed it. And on our writing group, we had a very wide representation. Didn't quite get every denomination, but we went for as wide as possible. Because what this declaration is not about what does this particular denomination think or this denomination think. It's about the fact that when it comes to marriage, sex, and identity, there is such an absolutely crystal clear historic Christian position, which is profoundly embedded in the very nature of the Christian gospel, that for basically 1,950 years, there was zero disagreement over it. And it's really only in the last 4 decades that the idea has grown up that there can be any other view. And so we are wanting to make very clear that this is just a universal Christian teaching. And it's a universal Christian teaching because it is very, very good, because it is the most profoundly loving way we can order our sex lives, is to submit ourselves to Jesus Christ's design and commands to do with marriage.
So we, as an organisation, we come at it from whether or not we're Christians, and we are, as it turns out, but we come at it from a secular evidence base. And the secular evidence base is quite clear that growing up with your married mum and dad is the way to produce the best version of the next generation for society, and that all the benefits in terms of mental, physical, financial, societal, all the benefits, whether or not you get involved with the criminal justice system, all sorts of things like that, the benefits are unequivocal from the international body of peer-reviewed literature and research and academic evidence. Marriage is just best, bar none. Yet, like you say, over the last 40 or 50 years, things have changed radically, not just to introduce other things, but actually to put down the concept of marriage and almost to abolish the family, if I can use that phrase, which has been used in various strategic documents that have been in the public domain over the last, 50, 60, 70 years, in fact. Why do you think this is happening? When the benefits are so clear, Matthew, to society, why do you think the alternatives are being pushed in such a hard way and marriage is being diminished?
Yes, that's a really great question. I think as a sort of step back from that, but I will come to your question, is to from a Christian point of view, we kind of think, of course, all the evidence base is so clear, because the same God who has redeemed us in Christ is the God who made the world. And given that he made us this way, his commands, and indeed the things that he's called us to in Christ in redeeming us, are very completely fit with the way that God has made the world. So absolutely, it is the best thing for people, and that we believing that because God has said so through Christ and through the Bible, and believing it because the evidence says so, really do fit together hand in glove. Those fit together very well. Why then, when that is the case, has this come under so much pressure? I think there are 2 things to say to that. One is that that's been true in every generation of the world. Indeed, that is the very nature of sin. A fundamental part of the Christian understanding of humanity is that what we want to do is not what is best for us all the time. What's gone wrong with human nature in our rebellion as a race against God is that we don't what we want is not what's best, and so constantly we do things that aren't best, and we know that's true in every area of life. Why do parents have to teach their children not to only eat chips and pizza, and tell them they've got to eat their veg and stuff? Well, because what we want is not what's best for us, and so the loving thing to do for parents when with their kids is say that you can't only eat pizza and chips and sweets. Like you need to learn to submit to the way that you've been designed and the way your body's supposed to work. Right? And so that's true of food. It's also true in all of your other kind of relationships. You can't go into your friendships demanding that your friends do exactly what you want all the time. You need to learn instead to do what the nature of being human and the way that human interaction works requires if you're going to learn to love friends. That's what it means. And so it's completely true here as well. But all the time, human nature pushes against that. So that's part of the answer. It happens in every age. But there's a second part of the answer, which is to say that we're living in an age which is in Western nations, the nations that have been most deeply affected by Christianity historically, of a very deliberate push to overturn that heritage, and particularly to replace the worship of God with the worship of self. Really, that's kind of the reigning religion in the West, and therefore the reason that people have come to hate marriage so much is that it is a fundamentally selfless institution, and it's fundamentally about saying my life isn't about myself. I am devoting myself to not just one other person, but to this one other person whom God's given to me so that we can be the parents of the next generation. And so marriage and children go together. And marriage is all about subordinating my desires to the welfare of one person in particular, the children who will result to that, and then that flows out to the rest of society. It's all about self-sacrifice.
That's interesting because marriage, it's often portrayed as kind of almost self-indulgence. I love that person, I lust that person, love is love, therefore let's get together, sort of thing.
Absolutely, and that's one of the huge ironies, and one of the things that really kind of triggered this up in my mind originally is this constant mantra of kind of you must be free to love who you want, and love is love wherever it's found. And the answer is that's absolute nonsense. Like it is complete nonsense. It is not all the time. Love is not really loving. We all know that. Every time there's a man who abandons his wife and kids because he wants to run off with a woman he's met at the office, is that love? The answer, no. That is a deeply, deeply unloving thing to do. Indeed, there's a sense in which the idea that you can import into marriage this mantra that love is love wherever it's found, it's complete contradiction. Marriage is all about surrendering the right to marry who you want to. In the marriage service, you make a vow that you will forsake all others for as long as you both shall live. And the point about marriage is to say it's not up to me to pursue who I want. It's not up to me to try to find the satisfaction that I want. I am not going to order my life around sexual self-fulfillment. Instead, I'm going to commit myself to one person. That is what real love looks like. And the love that is talked about constantly in our society is really it's not even a pale shadow of love. It's a grotesque distortion of it. This constant drive to satisfy self by finding the ideal sexual experience through my particular preference of sexual partner. It reduces sex to a transaction in which I am the consumer and the other person is the provider. And that is a miserable and deeply unloving way to go around life.
And as opposed to the if you like, whether or not you're a Christian, it's interesting to read the kind of biblical account in, I think it's Ephesians 5:22-33, isn't it, where Jesus talks about, or where it's spoken about Christ's giving his life for his church and kind of relating that to marriage.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the really fascinating things here, and a very important thing, which we've made the point in the Declaration very clearly, is that um, it is really common now to hear people say, "Well, the Bible hardly talks about about these relationships and things, and views of who marriage is between is a minor thing." That's not the case at all. The whole of the Bible is the story of a marriage. In fact, the Bible ends with a marriage in chapter 2. Sorry, begins with a marriage in chapter 2 and ends with a marriage in the final 2 chapters of the Bible. And why is that? Because the whole of history is about God sending his son to marry the church to himself, to win a bride. It's a love story. The chapter you just referred to in Paul's letter to the Ephesians very directly connects the two, that the relationship between husband and wife is designed by God as a mirror of the relationship between Christ and his church. What was Jesus doing when he came to earth, when he became human, when he was flogged by the Roman soldiers, when he was nailed to the cross? What was he doing? And the answer is he was laying down his life for his bride in order to make her a spotless, pure bride, without any blemish or defect, or in Ephesians 5. That this utter self-giving love that Christ has demonstrated, that is what marriage is about. And every human marriage is just a small scale imitation of that. And so marriage is written into creation from beginning to end. That's why creatures are made male and female. It's why human beings are made male and female. It's why all of human society in every age has been centered around and built upon the marriage of a man and a woman. There's been horrendous distortions and abuses of that in every culture too. But the basic idea and the glorious goodness of it is just, it's everywhere in Christian history. It's actually, you can find it much wider than that as well.
And it's why I think Carl Trueman says that marriage is at the heart of the culture war, the kind of definition of marriage, if you like. So I get asked a question, Matthew, how would you respond to this? Well, that's fine. You can believe in that and you can support that, and that can carry on as it always has done. But what's wrong with adding to that a tiny number of and it is just a teeny tiny number of people who want to have same-sex marriage? Why can't you just let them carry on and just add to that greater thing?
The very nature of the word marriage is about the joining of two together, not just two individuals for now, but the two become one flesh, both spiritually and physically, in the bodies of their children. Every child is the one flesh unit of their parents. And so marriage is inherently about the difference between man and woman. That's because Christ and his church are inherently different. He is God, we are not. He's the head, we're the body. He is the righteous one, we're sinners. He is the redeemer, we're the redeemed. We're fundamentally different to him. And so marriage is about God joining together two people in a way that is as mysterious as is the procreation of children. There is a profound mystery going on here. That's the words of the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 5 again. It's a profound mystery. If you add in what is something in essence entirely different, it's not a self-giving love for the sake of this one person very different to me because she's the opposite sex to me if I'm a man, or he is the opposite sex to me if I'm a woman. And what's more, it's about the commitment to our children. It's about the commitment to the rest of society that flows from that. If you bring in something that has nothing to do with that, but is simply about sexual self-fulfillment, what you've done is to redefine the word so much that it now means something entirely different.
Mm-hmm. So how do we talk to people? So I go around the country talking to thousands of people in support of or talking about the arguments and the evidence in support of one man, one woman marriage. And some people find that deeply hurtful because they say, well, I just don't feel that way. Or I know people who I love deeply who are in a happily married relationship. And when the rubber hits the road in terms of human emotions, it then becomes complicated. I kind of relate it to If you're obviously familiar with the tabernacle in the Old Testament, and where the ark of God, which represented God, was in an inner tent within another tent, and kind of, only one person was allowed to go in there, and nobody with who had certain conditions attached to them was allowed to be that one person. For example, if somebody had a disability. Now, I can't see very well, so I wouldn't have been allowed to be that person. And you think that in some ways that's kind of, you think, well, I was born that way. And this is another one of the phrases which is used. So is it my fault that I shouldn't be? And there are then people who will say, well, look, I'm born that way. Is it fair to deny that of me? And you can feel their pain when they talk to you. So how do you respond to people in that kind of a situation?
Yes, indeed. And we should probably go further as well, and to say that, of course, there are plenty of people who've had desperately painful experiences of the marriage of a man and a woman as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so whenever we're dealing with sexual matters, we're dealing with things that go very, very deep into people's experiences, because it's part of the way that God has designed us as bodies and souls knitted together, and nowhere is that knitting together more close and therefore more joyful when done rightly, and more painful when gone wrong, than in sexual matters. And so the first thing to say is, we've got to be people who are full of compassion. We are in a deeply, deeply damaged world, and that damage is reflected in sexual sin more than anywhere else. And so, of course, we want to be very, very compassionate, and that is exactly what drives us here. Because you see that the constant assumption and pushing of the idea that the only loving thing to do is to say to people, you must follow through on what your desires are. That is the thing that is profoundly damaging, more than anything else. And we need to be really clear about that. And that's what's been very much missing from this debate, is that it is the doctrine, and it is a doctrine that is embedded in not just the LGBT movement, but much wider than that, in the whole of sort of post-Christian Western society, which is that your sexual drive is so constitutive of who you are that you must fulfill it no matter what. That doctrine is at the root of a huge pile of human misery, and we need to be really clear about that. It's at the root of the misery of untold numbers of children who are brought into the world by parents who don't want them, or didn't want them, and may not still love them, because the desire for sexual pleasure was prioritized over the needs of the children who result from it. And so that's why we have such vast abortion figures. It's why there are so many children who are born in families where they cannot be looked after, where they may never know their father, or sometimes may never know their mother because they need to be taken away straight away. And in some sense, almost every case of child neglect really springs from that. But then you can go wider, can't we? But that is what underlies child abuse. It's adults who think that fulfilling their sexual desires is more important than anything else. Well, if their sexual desires happen to be towards children, then what are they going to do? I'm certainly not saying in any way that is to be that that's the same group of people. I'm just saying the same idea lies behind it. Or what about the rampant abuse of women by men? Where does that come from? Well, if you're in a society where you teach people all the time that your sex drive is what makes you must fulfill it, then that's going to lead to a huge number of men who set out to fulfill their sexual nature by mistreating women. And the point is that you cannot teach the doctrine which we teach all the time. I'm not saying we not Christians, but which is taught all the time in our culture, which is you must fulfill yourself to be truly human. You can't teach that and keep it in a little box over here where it's harmless amongst a certain group of people. What you end up doing is having this huge catalogue of collateral damage, and we see that all around us, all of the time. And that's why, by far, the most loving thing to do for everyone is to say, yeah, we all have sexual desires. None of us are they right. There's all sorts of different degrees in which they may trouble us or tempt us, whatever. But for all of us, the right thing to do is to say, no, we cannot fulfill them just as we want to. There is a right way to fulfill them, and that requires a huge suppression of what we naturally want to do. And that is a good and right thing to do. And it's something that not only does God command in the Bible, it's something that He grants His grace to forgive us for all the times we failed to do it. And it's something He gives strength by His Spirit to enable us to do. So that's a long answer, but basically, love drives us in this direction. Love does not simply put up a big green light and say, yeah, go and do what you want to do. That is the opposite of love.
And that's the thing. And I think when you take phrases like love is love and born this way, I mean, the evidence around born this way isn't there. The contrary evidence, there's a lot of contrary evidence, but that's maybe another discussion. But when you take love is love and born this way, those two things, if you extrapolate them, lead to some pretty, what everyone would say would be, well, most people, actually not everyone, but a lot of people, most people would say, lead to some pretty strange outcomes if you extrapolate them, down the line to some pretty horrific things, really.
Definitely. Definitely.
Mothers, fathers marrying daughters and all sorts of things like that. Love is love and born this way. Well, hey, what's so it leads down some pretty strange roads. So society somewhere has got to come up with some rules around that, if you like, maybe. And then also from a government perspective, well, actually, the evidence is quite clear still that the thing that works for the best version of the next generation is growing up with your biological mum and dad. And that's that. The evidence is quite, so from a government point of view, let's promote the thing that seems to work. Now, that's not saying that a civil society doesn't allow other stuff. That's a separate conversation. In the church, however, well, that's another discussion entirely, because, if you are a believer, well, you believe surely what the Bible says. That's what being a believer is, I'd have thought. And so, you then realize that the Bible's quite clear on these things, and why so many people outside the church then say, well, it's wrong for you to believe that that's what the Bible believes. You think, well, no one's asking you to believe it, but it's what we believe.
Yeah. Yes, and that's one of the things that we've sought to do. So in the sort of the reason for the name of the Greater Love Declaration is it's from Jesus's words in John chapter 15. Greater love has no one than this, that He lay down, or that someone laid down his life for his friends. And so it is the peculiar moral drive of Christianity that we are driven not by self-fulfillment but by self-sacrifice. We're not driven by trying to get what we think we want or need. We're driven instead by saying, I will deny myself. Both I'll deny myself good things for your sake, and also I'll refuse to allow myself to pursue bad things for your sake. But we lay down our lives for other people. That's what Christians are called to do. And we think we do it in every area of life. That's why Christians are people who are concerned for the poor. It's why we stand up for the needy. It's why we look out for one another. It's why within churches, just this 2 weeks ago in our church, we had a new baby born to a family who live a few miles out of town. Within a few days, they're getting meals dropped off on their doorstep from all sorts of people in the church. Lots of people who don't even know them very well, just because we want to help them. Okay, we don't get anything out of it. We don't get. But this is what we do. This is what we do because Christ laid down His life for us. We're going to lay down our lives for one another. So we do it in those small ways. When it comes to how we order the big, most important things in our lives, which really comes down to family, marriage, and that includes sex, then it's all about saying no to our selfish desires and instead saying, well, I'll conform to Christ.
And let's point out that again, Christianity isn't about whether you're heterosexual or not. because it turns out there are lots of other types of sin, and all men have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But society just seems to be prepossessed with, as you say, sexuality at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's very frustrating when people kind of say, "Oh, why are you Christians so obsessed with sex?" To which the answer is like, it's not us who's obsessed with sex. We're only having to talk about it because we live in a world that's so horrifically obsessed with sex, and which preaches this. I think you've got to call it a gospel, which says that the route to salvation is sufficient orgasms. Which is a hideous doctrine to teach, and yet that is effectively what we teach our children in schools, and what is in what is now sort of a pretty normal topic of lots of popular music, and it's everywhere in the media. And Christians were saying, no, it's not. It's not that important, and it's not that important for individual life. It's not that important for family life. What matters more is or at least that is a small piece of a much larger tapestry of what love looks like. And that's what biblical law is all about. It's a tapestry that depicts what real love looks like. And because God sees everything in a way that we don't, he knows how all the threads weave in and out of each other. And he knows the knock-on effects that each of our decisions has on other people. And so lots of times the commands of the Bible don't seem to make much sense to us there and then at the time. But they are the way that we love one another in practice. That's why James calls the law of love. And when Jesus says that to love your neighbor as yourself and love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength is the law and the prophets, that sums up what the law's about. This is the way we love one another.
So where do we go from here then, Matthew? I mean, how do we've come a long way from a societal perspective. We've fallen a long way, some might say. Others would call it progressive. But in terms of returning to what you might say are the good things in the Greater Love Declaration, how do we get from where we are? What's the route forward? I mean, you've got this declaration. I think it's signed by over 1,000 ministers and another however many supporters.
It might be useful to clarify that. It's a declaration of church ministers, or ministers and other pastoral workers, and so different denominations use different words, but clergy, ministers, pastors, but also those who are in pastoral roles in churches. So that'll include people like youth workers. So it's a declaration by people who are directly involved in pastoral ministry. Part of the reason for that is because they're the people who are most directly in the firing line if legislation comes down the tracks, which would criminalise the teaching of marriage, which is a very real possibility. That's what that's what those campaigning for a ban on so-called conversion therapy are really gunning for. They want it to be illegal to teach about marriage. So that's why it's a declaration of us. But so if any of your listeners are in a pastoral role in a Christian church, we would love you to sign the declaration. But also, anyone can sign in support. So if you're just a normal Christian who supports it, even if you're not a Christian, but you actually think it's good for Christians to be stating their opinion on this clearly, we'd love you to sign as well. And so that you can sign in two different ways depending on where you are. So that's a small thing you can do immediately. Where do we go as a society with this? Well, a big part of the point of the declaration is that there's I think the stage in which we could hope that this sort of wave of abandoning of a Christian ethic would pass. I think we're well past that, aren't we? We're now at a stage where there are very active attempts to try to squash Christianity out of public life in Christianity in general. In Britain in general. And the answer to that is we've got to remain faithful for ourselves. And what we want to urge all churches to do is to boldly and confidently stand by what Christ has taught, because it is the way to really love people. We want to call people who aren't Christians to come and sort of have a good look at why what Christ teaches is so good, and why it's better than anything else out there. And we would love you to come and join us. And who knows what God may do in the future. I mean, we've been here before, haven't we? That Christianity first emerged into the world, into a world that was even more sexually horrific than our own. The Roman Empire was just an utterly appalling place in terms of the way that sex was constantly used as a means of exploitation and power. And prostitution was not, I mean, it's been rife in every culture, but in the Roman Empire, prostitution was so socially accepted. The brothels were on the main squares and were visited by all the most noble people in the town, and no one cared about it. Part of the reason that this has happened is that we've forgotten actually how awful the world was before Christianity came and taught what real love looks like. And so we've been here before. We've been worse than this before. And the way that Christianity prevailed in the first few centuries of the church was by bold faithfulness and willingness to suffer for being faithful to Christ. And part of the point of our declaration is ministers saying that we're going to do that again. Like we're not going to change. We're not going to stop teaching this. If there are laws put on the statute books that make it a criminal offence to tell people that they need to either abstain from sex entirely, or if they're married, be faithful to the one person of the opposite sex whom they're married to. And that's a very real possibility. The Scottish government looks like it's heading that way very fast. The UK government may well get there. If that happens, we're not going to change. And if that means we go to prison, we'll go to prison. And to be honest, if we get thrown to the lions, we'll do that too, because that's actually what real love looks like. We lay down our lives for the good of other people. The Christian doctrine of marriage is so good, and so good for so many, and so good for society as a whole, and so good for ourselves, and so glorifying to God, and so elevating to human nature. We're not maggots squirming in the dirt, and we're not goats who just live by fulfilling our every human desire, our every bodily desire. No, we're designed to display the glory of God. This is so good. We're going to stand by it, and we'll proclaim it, and we'll encourage people to live by it, and we'll help people who've been damaged by all the ways that sexual anarchy damages them, and we'll repent of our own sins in this area, because we're just as bad as everyone else, and we're there, but for the grace of God, go all of us. And we're going to keep on doing those things, and wherever everything goes is up to God, because He's in charge.
Great. Well, I'm not going to top that one. That's fantastic. Matthew Roberts, what a joy and a privilege it is to speak to you. Let me encourage anyone who's listening still to go to greaterlove.org.uk, sign the declaration if you feel that's something you can do. Matthew, thank you so much for your work, for getting on with this. May the Lord lead you in everything that you've got to do from here onward. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Tony, very much. It's been a pleasure to be with you.